Ever wonder what silence truly sounds like? Not the absence of noise, but the weight of it. A silence that presses down on you, that crawls under your skin, whispers your name from empty rooms. A silence that isn't empty at all, but waiting. This is a story about that kind of silence. A silence that screams. Sarah wasn't looking for a nightmare. She was just looking for a paycheck. House sitting for the wealthy, eccentric Blackwoods seemed like an easy gig. A month alone in their sprawling, isolated mansion up in the hills. The offer was ludicrously generous, almost too good to be true, stirring a faint tremor of unease beneath her excitement. But the allure of escape, of quiet solitude in a place untouched by the city's ceaseless clamor, proved irresistible. How bad could it be? She would soon learn that some questions are best left unasked, their answers far more terrible than any fleeting curiosity. The first thing that hit her wasn't the opulence, though the house had it in spades. Marble floors, towering ceilings, antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. No, the first thing was the cold. Not just a chill, but a deep, pervasive cold that seemed to emanate from the very stone and timber, a bone-deep iciness that seeped into her bones, even in late summer's supposed warmth. And then, the silence. Not just quiet, but an absolute suffocating void of sound. No distant traffic, no neighbor's dog, just the vast, empty hush of the ancient woods pressing in from all sides. A silence that felt less like peace and more like a watchful, hungry entity. Mr. Blackwood, a gaunt man with unnervingly still eyes that seemed to hold ancient, unspoken knowledge, gave her a quick, almost ritualistic tour. Just keep an eye on things, Sarah. Feed the cat, water the plants. Don't worry about the cellar, he'd said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble devoid of warmth. It's locked. And please, don't go poking around the attic. It's just old storage. He hadn't smiled, not once. His departure felt like a prophecy fulfilled. His sleek black car disappearing down the winding, shadowed driveway, leaving Sarah utterly alone in a stillness that now felt truly absolute, a void waiting to be filled by something unknown. The first few days were serene, if a little eerie. The house was enormous, a labyrinth of forgotten rooms and echoing hallways, each turn seeming to lead deeper into its cold, silent heart. She kept getting lost, a disorienting sensation that whispered of something more than mere unfamiliarity. The cat, a grumpy Persian named Mittens, mostly ignored her, a fluffy shadow disappearing into the gloom, a fleeting comfort against the encroaching solitude. Sarah tried to make the best of it. She cooked, read, watched movies on the colossal TV, but the silence, it was always there, a living, breathing thing, an unseen presence that pressed in on her, molding her thoughts, twisting her perceptions. It was not empty, this silence, it was pregnant with unspoken things. Then came the sounds. It started subtly, like all the best nightmares do. A faint creak from upstairs when she was downstairs, so soft she questioned its existence. A whisper of movement in her peripheral vision, a shadow that wasn't quite there when she turned her head, marking her certainty. She blamed the old house, the settling timbers, the shifting foundations. Old houses breathe, they settle, they groan. Right, she clung to this rationalization, even as it felt increasingly flimsy against the growing weight of the inexplicable. One night, as she was drifting off to sleep in the vast master bedroom, the only room that felt remotely welcoming, a distinct tap echoed from the wall next to her bed. Tap, tap, tap. She sat bolt upright, heart pounding. Mittens, she called out, her voice thin in the darkness. Silence, just the frantic thrum of her own pulse in her ears. She tried to convince herself it was the pipes, the wind. But there was no wind that night. The air was still and heavy. The next morning, she noticed a small, old-fashioned music box on the bedside table. She swore it hadn't been there before, its sudden appearance a jarring note in the house's otherwise stagnant tableau. It was intricately carved wood, with a tarnished silver key. She picked it up, a strange electric shiver running down her spine. It felt cold, infused with the same deep, ancient cold as the house itself. She wound the key. A tinkling, melancholic melody, at once delicate and deeply unsettling, filled the room. A tune she didn't recognize, but it felt achingly familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby from a forgotten dream. There was a profound wrongness to it. a subtle discord that grated on her nerves, speaking of things that should not be heard. Before it could finish its unsettling lament, she slammed the lid shut, the sudden silence almost a relief. Something about that sound, it was wrong, terribly wrong. She put it in a drawer, trying to forget about it, but its melody had already etched itself into the quiet corners of her mind. But the house wasn't done with her. The sounds grew bolder, less ambiguous. Footsteps, clear and deliberate, walked across the floor directly above her when she knew for a fact the entire upper floor was empty, devoid of life. Sometimes they sounded small, like a child's quick patter, a ghostly game in the echoing halls. Other times, heavy, dragging steps, as if something immense and burdened was slowly making its way through the silent, upper reaches of the mansion. She tried calling a friend, a desperate plea for connection to the sanity she felt slipping, but her phone had barely 1 bar of service, a cruel trick of the isolated location. The isolation was beginning to feel less like peace and more like an elaborate, inescapable trap, severing her from the comforting anchors of the outside world. She started seeing things that blurred the line between waking and nightmare. Quick, darting shadows at the end of hallways, just beyond the reach of the faint interior lights. A flicker of movement reflected in a dark window, gone when she looked directly, leaving only the oppressive blackness of the night. Once she was making coffee in the enormous, outdated kitchen, and when she turned to grab a mug, she saw it, a tiny porcelain doll sitting on the counter, facing her with an unnerving stillness. Its eyes, painted a disturbing, too vivid blue, seemed to stare right into her soul, holding an ancient, malevolent intelligence. She'd never seen it before. It wasn't a decor item. It looked ancient, almost sickly, its porcelain skin faintly yellowed, its painted smile fixed in a chilling rictus. Her hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked gasp escaping her lips. She stood frozen, staring at it for what felt like an eternity, her mind grappling with the impossible, the sheer impossibility of its presence. Then, with a shudder of primal fear, she snatched it up and tossed it into the deepest kitchen cabinet, slamming the door shut as if trying to imprison the insidious dread it represented. Sleep became a luxury, a fleeting reprieve from the waking horror. Every creak, every groan of the house, every faint, spectral whisper seemed magnified in the oppressive darkness, each sound a deliberate prod at the edges of her sanity. She found herself sleeping with the lights on in her room, a pathetic, ultimately futile attempt to ward off the encroaching dread. But the light, she realized, didn't reach the dark corners of her mind, where the true terrors had begun to take root, twisting her thoughts, blurring the lines of reality. One particularly stormy night, the power flickered. The wind howled outside, sounding like a desperate cry. Thunder cracked, shaking the very foundations of the old mansion. Sarah was huddled in the living room, trying to read by the dim light of her phone. Then she heard it, distinctly, a child crying, a soft, mournful wail coming from somewhere upstairs. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't the house settling. This was a sound of pure, unadulterated sorrow. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, the storm playing tricks, but the crying continued, growing louder, more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from the forbidden attic. Against every fiber of her being, a terrifying curiosity, a perverse fascination, began to take hold. She grabbed a heavy, antique flashlight, its beam a weak defiance. Her hands shook so hard the beam danced erratically, painting monstrous shadows. Step by agonizing step, she ascended the grand staircase, each tread groaning under her weight, echoing her frantic heart. The crying was clearer now, a fragile broken sound that tore at her, pulling her inexorably upward, toward the small, dusty door Mr. Blackwood had warned her about. The door to the attic, a threshold to the unknown. The door wasn't locked. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of inky blackness visible, a gaping maw into the house's deepest secret. A cold draft, colder than anything she'd felt in the house, a breath from another realm, brushed against her face, carrying with it the faint, cloying scent of dust and something else, something far more ancient and unsettling. She pushed the door open, her hand trembling so badly the flashlight almost slipped, revealing a cavern of forgotten things. Dust motes, like ghostly motes of thought, danced in the single shaft of moonlight piercing a grimy window, illuminating a scene of quiet desolation. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming grotesque, fleeting shapes, like phantoms observing her intrusion. Old trunks, tattered furniture, yellowed portraits with eyes that seemed to follow her, witnesses to untold ages. And in the very center, under a thin, moth-eaten sheet, something small, profoundly out of place, waited. The crying stopped the moment she stepped inside, replaced by an oppressive stillness. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of dust, and something else, something faintly sweet, like old, dried flowers mixed with something metallic. A whisper, barely audible, slithered into her ear, right next to her head. "You shouldn't be here," Sarah screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from her throat. She spun around, frantically shining the light, but there was nothing, just the dancing shadows, mocking her. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Then slowly, agonizingly, with a movement that defied any earthly explanation, the sheet over the crib began to lift. Not by a breeze, but as if an unseen hand was pulling it back. Underneath, the crib was empty, a profound, chilling void. But then, a faint indentation appeared on the dusty mattress, as if something incredibly light had just settled there. And next to it, on the wooden railing, was the music box. The same music box she'd put away, defying logic, defying memory. It was open, and the melancholic lullaby was playing, slow and distorted, like a broken record, its notes twisting into an unbearable crescendo of dread. The blue-eyed porcelain doll was sitting in the crib, its tiny form radiating an unsettling malevolence. Its head was slightly tilted, and its painted eyes, magnified by the dim light, seemed to glint with an ancient, unfathomable intelligence, a knowing cruelty that chilled her to the core. A tiny, imperceptible smile seemed to stretch its delicate lips, a silent, triumphant rictus. She wanted to play. The whisper came again, from all around her, echoing off the attic walls, a chorus of tiny, childish voices, thin and sharp as slivers of ice, flaying her sanity. Sarah didn't think, she didn't hesitate. She dropped the flashlight, the beam rolling wildly across the floor, painting the terrifying scene in erratic flashes. She stumbled backward, tripping over something unseen, falling hard. The music box continued its broken melody, a sickening soundtrack to her terror. She scrambled to her feet, heart threatening to burst from her chest, and bolted. She didn't look back. She didn't stop to grab anything. She didn't care about her belongings, her money, anything. Her only thought was escape. Get out now. She fumbled with the front door, the heavy brass knob cold and slick in her sweaty hand. It seemed to resist, as if the house itself was trying to hold her prisoner. With a desperate heave, she finally yanked it open, stumbling out into the pouring rain, the fierce wind whipping her hair around her face. She didn't stop running until her lungs burned and her legs felt like jelly. She ran down the long, winding driveway, splashing through puddles, the darkness of the ancient woods pressing in, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. She didn't stop until she reached the main road, a distant, flickering street light, a symbol of the fragile, ordered world she had almost lost. She flagged down the first car she saw, a bewildered couple, their faces etched with concern as they took one look at her wild eyes, her soaked, trembling form, utterly broken by what she had witnessed. She babbled incoherent words spilling from her mouth, a torrent of terror about the house, the doll, the whispers, the crying, the ancient, watching silence. They looked at her with pity and suspicion, their rational minds unable to grasp the abyss into which she had stared. They drove her to the nearest small-town police station. The police, of course, found nothing. The house was empty, silent, just as Mr. Blackwood had left it. No dolls, no music box out of place. No sign of any disturbance, any rupture in the fabric of the ordinary. They chalked it up to a young woman getting spooked by an old house, perhaps a vivid imagination coupled with extreme isolation, a convenient narrative for horrors they could not comprehend. Sarah never went back, she never collected her money, she couldn't. Even now, years later, the indelible memory of that house, that profound cold, that suffocating silence, still haunts her every waking moment, a shadow clinging to her soul. She still hears the faint, distorted melody of that music box sometimes, at the edge of her hearing, when the world gets too quiet. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when sleep finally claims her, she dreams of those blue-eyed dolls, their tiny porcelain lips curled into a smile, whispering, she wanted to play. The question claws at her mind, a relentless, unanswerable torment. Who was she? What ancient, nameless horror truly resided in that house? What happens to those who stay too long in a silence that isn't empty, but merely waiting, always waiting? Because some houses don't just hold secrets. They hold spirits, entities of an unfathomable past, and sometimes those spirits just want to play, forever, beyond the grasp of time and sanity.